You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik.
Good morning, Josh. It's good to see you. We just started our recording, and as always, there's always some kind of little glitch, and Josh's computer wanted to do a software update, but it's amazing. I think we're running on 25, 26 episodes, Josh, and it still amazes me that we're able to have such good internet connections between the Caribbean and Africa. And once again, today, I think we have a topic that's a lot of fun that kind of talks about what life is like on the mission field and adapting some of our supporting churches and inviting them to come participate with us.
That's right. Mission trips. We are going to talk about the pros and cons of missions trips. And I'm just going to preface it by this. I love mission trips. I love hosting them, and I loved going on them when I was younger. You've hosted quite a few mission trips. Tell us a little bit about your experience of hosting mission trips. Of course, you've explained to us last week you've gone on mission trips, but how many mission trips have you hosted about, and what were the nature of those trips?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as we were doing prep for our episode. I know it's over 20. It's probably closer to 30 plus. And as we'll dive into the subject a little more today, we'll get into more specifics. But generally, we've had mission groups come from as little as 4 or 5 people to as high as 30. And sometimes it's for outreaches, evangelistically passing out tracts and flyers. Sometimes it's for VBS. We've done family fairs. We've had many men's construction trips. We have had teenagers interact with youth conferences. So we've had the whole gambit, different things. And I know over the years, we've learned a lot. And, very early on, we learned a lot by just asking some of our missionary friends on the mission field for some advice. And so today, Josh and I would like to just kind of share with you guys some of the wonderful blessings that come from it, and definitely some things to consider so that they are blessings and not maybe hindrances to your ministry.
Yeah, and I think we're going to approach it from 2 angles. We're going to give some advice and tips from our own experience to missionaries who are hosting a team. Maybe you haven't hosted that many mission trips and you would like to bring in some teams for various reasons, or maybe you are an individual in a local church that wants to take a mission trip. And so we're going to give some tips as well on making a successful mission trip, how to prepare for it, and how to make the most of that time. But overall, Erik, there's kind of mixed reviews nowadays on the topic of mission trips. If you Google mission trips, missionary trips, there's some articles that'll pop up. I came across a couple. There's a book that was written recently by Robert Lupin called Toxic Charity. And it's actually a really good book that lays out some of the issues with charitable organizations going into poverty-stricken countries and doing a whole bunch of work, but not doing follow-up. And we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as, are there pros, are there cons? There's a lot of negatives out there today that you'll find articles written about it. And I think there's some legitimate points, but at the same time, Absolutely. I think there's a lot of great net benefits to not only going on a mission trip, but if you're a missionary, hosting a mission trip. And so one veteran missionary looked at me one time when I was talking to him about mission trips and how many we've hosted. And he said, "Man, are you crazy? Like, we just don't do mission trips." I said, "Well, I mean, we love it." So in your experience, obviously you've done quite a few mission trips. Overall, does the benefit outweigh the negative of hosting mission trips for you?
Well, I would say this first. Let me return to the beginning. A mission trip for the missionary can provide such great encouragement in the work. But number one priority before you even say yes to that group, you need to be able to understand what's the goal, what's going to be accomplished. And so in many ways, it's hard to know if it was beneficial if you haven't prepared ahead of time and said, what do we want to accomplish? And so, yes, for me, mission groups, almost without exception, have been very beneficial to our work. There have been exceptions. We might talk about some funny cases where we had people and things didn't mesh. And that's funny too. That's a little bit like when you're on furlough and you have those stories. But for me, the great blessing was, one, having been on many missions trips on the side of being a a church, not being the missionary, being the person coming to help the missionary. And so understanding what we can do to help the missionary. And then on this side, understanding after a couple of mission trips, whoa, we need to recalibrate this. And so I think so much of it, Josh, on having a positive, wonderful, satisfying experience for the missionary is understanding your ministry there on the field and how these people who are coming and who have such great, amazing hearts. I try to, every time we have a missions group, explain to our people the sacrifice, because, Josh and I are going to talk about some things, and it's going to be kind of deep in the woods and deep in the weeds, you might say. But we want to start from the very beginning to say, if you have the desire to get on an airplane, take actual time off from work, spend your hard-earned money to go help a missionary, that is a good thing. What we're talking about is understanding how that good desire can actually be a blessing to that local New Testament work there. Now, in our experience, I thank the Lord that I had other missionaries ahead of me who really kind of gave me some insight. And one of the ways I was able to see missionaries who, some people, they just had everybody in, and they tried to just keep them busy. And I saw how it ran them ragged. And I said, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then other people who really came alongside of me and tried to help me maybe have a little better filter. And from the outset, Josh, this is something that I'm sure you're good at this, but I found out other missionaries aren't. There's one word, two letters that some missionaries have not learned when it comes to mission groups. And the answer is no. Sometimes you just have to say no. Now, you can do it in a sweet way. You can do it creatively. But sometimes you see things aren't going to work. And so you just have to say no. But when we say yes, it's because we feel very strongly that this group's going to come and they're going to be just a boost of energy and help to the mission work.
Absolutely. There's so much planning that goes into it. It is hard work. And yet at the same time, you, as a missionary, you really there has to be a lot of planning, a lot of communication with the team that is coming so that you aren't just giving busy work for work's sake, but that you're fulfilling, like you said, a specific goal, a specific objective. There needs to be a purpose behind it. Right. And so I'll tell you, we'll get more into logistics and prepping and planning, but one of the churches that I think does it the best that I've ever seen is your home church, Temple Baptist Church. I mean, they've got it down to a science, the way that they do mission trips, whether it's a construction trip or, whatever the case may be. It's incredible. Your church came to do some construction. They were one of our first construction teams that we hosted, Temple Baptist Church there. Your pastor came, Pastor Pittman, and several others from the church. And man, they brought over a Honda generator. They brought over an entire cement mixer.
I remember that.
They disassembled it. There was a handle that you used to pull down the bar, to pull down the cement. So they had to actually cut that, and they just shortened the handle. They put that thing in a case, and they shipped it over on the airplane. They got it here, and after they assembled it, I thought, how on earth did you get that over here? And everything's labeled, all the tools laid out. Man, they did such an excellent job. We might have to get your pastor on here and just have him lay out how he's done it. But I think it was your pastor who shared this story with me. They went to go do some construction in the Amazon. And he was emphasizing how important it is that there's that logistical communication and that the missionaries prepared as well. He was telling me,
I know that story.
They got to they got to that area, got on the boat, got everything going. And they get, 2-3 hours down the river. They finally get to the village and they get off, unload their tools. And I think it was your pastor looks around and says, "Where's the material to build?" And the missionary went, "Oh, I knew I was forgetting something." So look, missionary, if you're going to host a team, man, you've got to be prepared. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. And so, we've hosted.
Josh, let me just say, for the people who don't understand my pastor then, because the materials weren't there, got in a boat with a couple of men in the middle of the night. They're going down the Amazon looking for this wood because my pastor is type A and does not like to wait.
That's right. Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the points we're going to get to at the end is going to be about, the experience of personalities, when you do these mission trips. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but let's kind of do an overall generalization. Some of these articles that I looked up, the portions of the book I read about mission trips. Here's some facts that they raise. So the first thing I read about short-term mission trip, one of the questions they ask is, does it hurt or does it help in the long term? Okay. They stated some facts in the book, Toxic Charity. In a survey he did, they estimated about 2 million Americans per year make mission trips. Okay. Now, this
Wow.
is overall, and this is when
Yeah,
they
broad.
define a mission trip, we're talking about humanitarian efforts with most likely a Christian organization. And so it's very broadly speaking. He calls it a $2.4 billion a year industry. Now, I don't think mission trips are
Wow.
industries, except for when it gets into a charitable organization that does these sort of mission trips, whether it's construction, you go to rebuild a devastated area that's been, hit by a hurricane. And that was one of the things he brought
Mhm.
up. One of the things he mentioned in the book was that after a hurricane hit South America, I think it was, I forget which country it was, but they went in and rebuilt these homes with this charitable organization. And they estimated it cost for material and to get all the American workers there, it cost them about $30,000 per home, when had they just hired national workers, it would have been $3,000 per home. So they wouldn't have been able to do much more. And so I've had several pastors bring that up to me. And I'm going to ask you, have you been asked that? I've had pastors ask me, well, Josh, would it be cheaper for us? Would you be able to do more? Let's say we're going to bring over 10 guys. That's going to cost in the end, we're looking at close to 20,000 or more dollars just to get over there. And to stay there. I mean, 20 to $30,000 for 10 guys to come over. Can you do more with that 20 to $30,000 than if not bringing them? And so I have a couple answers I give to that. Have you had any pastor pose that question?
Oh yeah, certainly. This is kind of funny because I don't know how many of our audience members are familiar with the comedian John Christ, but he has made a very funny recent video of basically about this subject here, about the how some youth groups want to go and basically paint a building that was painted the week before by another youth group. It's really funny.
Right.
So if you don't know
Right.
this, you need to go check it out on YouTube. It's really funny. It's clean. It's funny. There's a lot of truth to that. And so that is one of the things when it comes to assessing your group. And we're talking mostly right now about work groups, when you're talking about building or rebuilding something.
Right.
And thankfully, we have had pastors who are very much in tune with understanding those aspects, things that they can come and do that would be a benefit, and others that would just be, I hate to say it won't be a waste, but maybe not the right allocation of time, money, and funds. And so thankfully, there are a lot of people who are like that. But at the same time, there is truth that by investing in missions, by buying a plane ticket and spending a little bit of money to come that week and come alongside national workers, which is what I like to do, have national workers work with the Americans. There's also an investment that I think pastors wisely understand too, that you are allowing faithful men in your church, and sometimes women as well, to see the mission field, which will always affect them forever as far as giving, praying that the Lord may use them or their children or grandchildren in the future. And so I think it's not just cut and dry, because it is true. If they send us money all the time, we probably, for the most part, can get national workers to do it far cheaper. But I think there is something to consider about the profitableness spiritually for that supporting church. And for me, I still like to have mission groups in when they can be helpful for accountability. I think those who are supporting us have the right to come and check it out when both schedules work and it's convenient. So I'm always open to that. But there are times when if they could send funds ahead, it would be far quicker and more efficient as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, and that's it. A lot of people have thought that through. We've had churches that said, well, instead of making a mission trip, we're going to send you like an equivalent of what it would cost. And I totally understand that. But at the same time, it's important to keep in mind that the gospel ministry, whether it's in America or overseas, is not dependent on finances. It's beyond finances. And yes, we want to invest where your treasure is, there where your heart be also. But the Bible also says my eye affects my heart, right? And so we love hosting people. And I kind of think it think of it this way. Sure, it would cost you maybe $2,000 to come visit us here in Senegal for a 2-week trip, right? Airline
Mhm.
ticket and transportation and food and lodging for the duration of your time, which isn't too bad. Most mission trips cost between $2,000-3,000, depending on where you're going and what you're
Mhm.
doing and how long you're staying. And again, this is in the context of construction or something
Mhm.
like that. But at the same time, uh, the investment of coming in person, and maybe somebody in a church, they may not give and drop $2,000 in the offering plate for your building
Mhm.
project. But if the pastor says, hey, we're going to go lend a hand over there, they'll say, hey, I'll try to scrape up and save $2,000 so I can go. So it's money that most likely wasn't going to be donated anyways, is the way I see it.
Mhm.
And now they're going to
Mhm.
try to save and come. And most of the time when we've had people come, they've saved up and they've set that money aside and they've come, their heart is open, and now they've seen Senegal face to face, they've seen the needs here, they've seen the work
Yeah,
there, and they become a much more profound partner in the ministry here. Not only do they know how to better pray,
absolutely.
but a lot of times whenever a need arises, those who have been here on the field are the first to respond to that need. Hey, you're doing this, we were there, we want to send X amount of dollars to help with this next building fund. We can't come to help this time, but we want to help you out financially. And so, if you're talking about finances, I mean, the work of the Lord is going to go forward with or without money,
Absolutely.
right? We may be seeing a big time, financial crisis here in the world with everything going on. But I always tell our church, whether we have the money to build a building or not, the church isn't the building. We don't need the money, is not what drives gospel ministry. And so, hey, if you can make a mission trip, go. But here's another thing. So, as I was
Mhm.
reading this book, one of the things that it brought up is, number one, it pointed out that a lot of charities and short term aid work has failed. And specifically, they did a study of Africa. Okay. They said that over the past 50 years, Africa has received $1 trillion in benevolent aid, but per capita, income is lower, adult literacy rate is lower, and life expectancy rate has stagnated. And so it appears that this short-term charity work has not been as beneficial as what many might have thought of. Then another thing that they point out in the book is 85% of aid money never reaches the targeted area of need. Now, this is
Mm.
talking about giving finances through a major
Right.
charity. One example they gave in the book is, there's a singer named Bono. So it said recently his charity was under fire because they audited his charity, which is called One. And when they audited it, they found out that only 1% of the money given to his charity actually reaches the needs that they're claiming to help, right? That's insane to me.
Mm.
Well, the most recent example is the charity that is that the Biden's current president of the United States, he established in the name of his deceased son, Bo, which is wonderful. Set up this charity to help. I forget what specifically, probably something with military, but it came out that only, it's a small fraction of the money actually goes to what they said it's going to, right? And so this
Mhm.
is where I'm coming to. The point I'm bringing all that up is, if you want your dollar and your investment in a short-term mission trip to be used wisely, and if you want to be a wise steward of a short-term mission trip, partner with a mission group that's going to go work in a local church context. Go through a local church and go to a place where they're helping a local church on the mission field. That's the key. A missionary who's there long term, that's there to plant a work and plant a local church. The greatest need in the world today, okay, is not more money. It's not to raise people out of poverty, although those are wonderful things to aspire to and to try to help with. It's a byproduct, I would say, of the gospel when it's lived out, but it's not a guarantee. The greatest need the world has today is local churches. It's where the gospel is proclaimed, it's where Jesus is known. And so, if you're going to be a wise steward and you want to wisely invest in a mission trip, whether it's your finances or going yourself, then I would want to place that emphasis. Invest in and go with a group that is partnering with a local church. So maybe you're not going on the mission trip. You're like, oh, I want to help with something. Instead of sending your money to this major corporation like the Red Cross or something like that, find a local church medical ministry outreach. Okay. We're going to host medical missions outreach next year. And
That's awesome.
they bring in all their equipment and all the money goes to working on the field, and they partner with a local church so that their efforts of what they do on the field is going to see long-term results, because the church is going to follow up on all that they did during that time that they were there. And so that's really important. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I agree with all that. I'm not going to add a whole lot, but I will say that there are even groups that I think maybe I'll just give it for instance. There's a very well-known missions organization that goes into countries like ours and does sport camps.
Okay.
And they're well known. If I would say their name, I don't want to say their name necessarily, but I met the director one time I was on a vacation. I just happened to run into this guy and talking to him, and I was new to the mission field, and he found out where I was ministering in a different part of the island. He said, "Oh wow, we just did a tennis camp there. We had 300 kids out there, and X amount got saved." And I was like, "What? Really? Like, what church were you working with?" And he said, "Well, we just haven't connected with the local church there yet." Well, at first I was very disappointed. But what I did was I said, "Well, listen, here's my name, here's my number. If you guys come here again, I would love to just get those names and numbers and help out." And long story short, we were able to reconnect. Next time they had a big baseball clinic with a really well-named baseball pitcher, Mariano Rivera, Hall of Famer. Hundreds of kids came out, and they let me be there and take all the names and numbers. And you know what? There were a lot of professions of faith, and we were able to connect with some of the kids. And one of the kids that came and was a very faithful member in our church for a long time, and he brought a bunch of his family. And long story short, we had one of our church planners through that contact. And so, I could have been very critical of that group, but instead I said, "Well, Lord, I think they may be missing this. Let me come alongside them. They had enough good things going right." And so I think there are even those opportunities, Josh, where we can maybe come alongside when we see that. But I 100% agree. You want to go with a known commodity that's helping out the local church, where those funds 100% are going to be used for the ministry and to help better the lives of the Nationals.
Excellent. That's such a great point. Case in point, I love that. Love that example that you gave. Exactly. It just shows just the long-term benefit of being connected with a local church ministry, because you're only there a short amount of time. And you want your investment to last long term. And so, make sure you're connected with the local church and the local church on the field, and see what the Lord will do. I know a lot of churches these days, they'll kind of adopt a local church in some part of the world, and they'll partner with them and invest a lot more attention and focus and finances in helping, a local church or in a region, maybe several local churches in those areas. And I love that idea. I love the idea of a church adopting a certain people group and finding a missionary that works with those people group in that general area, and just investing more thought and more time into making these mission trips an actual ministry, an outreach of fulfilling the Great Commission through your local church, and not just reaching your community, but just, as an extension, reaching and ministering in some other part of the world where there are struggles. There's so many doors that open. We've hosted construction teams, and yes, of course, we could do more if we hosted, Temple Baptist, your church came in, my home church came in, for what it costs to bring all that their team in. I could have bought land and built, double the size church. But if they gave that, but number one, they're not just going to send that much money out of the blue, right? Like, people aren't just donating that. Like I mentioned earlier, they'll save up the money for a specific trip. And that totally makes sense. Whereas at the same time, the testimony of, at least in our experience of in our area, the testimony of these men, these white men, two Bobs coming, and women and men that are older, okay, some were younger, middle age, but a lot of times churches, people that come on the construction teams are gentlemen who are retired with experience, and they're more free to be able to come on these trips. And our neighborhood, it just helped our testimony that much more when people in our neighborhood were watching and saying, boy, these elderly, not old, okay, but these white people of status, here they are side by side with me, slinging mud and putting up a wall. Like, they're stooping down to my level. And it was a big deal. And it left a testimony of, hey, these aren't the white people that we think in our mind what white people are like and Americans are like. Man, they were totally opposite. And so it opened a lot of doors by having good, humble men and women come and work alongside our nationals. Not only did it set a great example, but it really overturned some preconceived notions of what Americans are like. And they got to see, well, this is what you believe about Americans is most likely true, but these are believers, and we're Christians first, and we're followers of Jesus first. And that's what's important. And so let's talk about, maybe, unless you have anything else to add, let's talk a little bit about other type of mission trips. Yeah.
Let me add a little parentheses. I know in that context, when you say white people, that's probably the majority who've come with you. But I'm thinking of my friend Richard, who came on that trip, who's actually African American. And we joke, we're best friends. He was my best man at my wedding. I call him the Black MacGyver. But Richard's a perfect example of someone who, when I got called into missions and he was searching for what the Lord had for him, the Lord allowed him to stay there at our home church and serve and work in telecommunications. But Richard has literally gone all over the world. He's probably gone on 25 missions trips, and his skills and ability that he has have helped more missionaries than I've ever been able to help in my life. And it's so, I think seeing people like my buddy Richard, who, he lives for getting prepared with the missions team and going and building things and going down to the Amazon and going to Cambodia and going to Japan and going to Senegal, things that I'm sure I wouldn't be very good at. And so Josh and I are very careful to say, these guys who come in many times, they're helping us out in specific ways that we really very thankful for their help. So I just wanted to add that in there.
No, definitely. That is for sure. And any team we've ever hosted has always been a great blessing to us. But we've hosted more than just construction teams. We've hosted individuals, we've hosted college teams, and we hosted, I think, two churches that came just to do ministry. And now, in a country like ours, and I'm sure like yours, where it's not English predominantly, it can get a little tricky about finding things for people to do when they don't speak the language, but they want to come for a week or two. Have you hosted other trips beside construction teams?
Yes. So we have had, especially in the very beginning, when we were, we didn't have very many people coming to church. We were just getting started. We would have mixed groups. Like adults and teenagers, men and women, or teenage groups come in, and we would just kind of canvass the city. Spanish, English, in this culture, there's a lot of Spanglish. I'm sure it's totally different than in Senegal. In fact, what I would call, and I encourage young missionaries to have groups in, especially before you have all three services or multiple services and discipleship classes, is have some Americans in if it works in your culture. Ours, we would have 10, 15 people going through the city, passing out thousands of tracts, and I called them living billboards, and what would happen is people are like, who are all these gringos? What are they doing here? And that gave me opportunity to tell them about our church. And so we did that a lot in the beginning, but after a while that wasn't a need. And so we had VBSs, and I learned early on, 30, 40, 50-year-old American men and women didn't really connect with some 6 and 7-year-old Dominican kid. And so what we learned to do and adapt for our sakes, when it came to like evangelism or interaction with nationals, I found having a youth group, American youth group, come in when we did our, what we call Teen Week, where we every single night basically had from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, it was like a teen camp, but you went home at night. And without fail, Josh, American teenagers and Dominican teenagers always connected. The Dominicans were trying to learn their English and the Americans were trying to learn the Spanish. the adults and teenagers didn't seem to work as well, but teenagers everywhere, they just seem to speak this common language, and it worked. And so that's the kind of what we're talking about, figuring out how it works. And so we figured, if we're going to have, when a teen group calls me up, I say, all right, we're going to mesh you with the week when we have teen week, because I know it's going to work. It's just work without fail. Whereas after a number of times when people say, well, we want to bring our senior saints to come do a VBS, I'm like, I just don't think that's going to work. So yeah, we've had a couple of those type of groups as well.
Yeah, we've hosted 2 groups. We actually had a group come in from Arizona, and it was our largest team that we hosted. It was a local church there in Arizona. I think they brought in about 40 people, and we had them all scattered out throughout the building. And we planned this big carnival at the end of their time here. We had all these different outreaches. We do a soccer tournament every year with street kids, the Tally Bay. So they were a part of that. And then we had this big carnival planned. We were going to have this, huge turnout. It was really excited. We had a campground that we were going to meet with, and then COVID started rolling off, and they had to cancel everything. They got on the second to last flight out of the country. Okay. So they just barely made it out, but
wow.
It was interesting. So, but we had a great time, and we had to adapt to that, and as within the last 3 days that they were here, we couldn't really go anywhere. So we just 40 people stuck in a house here for about 3 days. It was interesting to say the least. But that being said, you really have
how many tracks can you stamp?
Yeah, exactly. You really have to, like you said, plan it out. What's the purpose of the trip? Now, one thing we like to do is hosting individuals. We need more laborers in this part of the world. Every country needs more laborers. And so whenever we're in the States, we try to promote an internship program that we've started here. But we're very deliberate with what the purpose of that internship is. And we want young people to come who want to be a part of that internship, who already know that they want to go into full-time ministry. I try to avoid, now we'll host anybody who wants to come. We always encourage our supporting pastors, hey, come out and visit us. We would love to have you come and see the work here. We want you to see firsthand, or send somebody from your church or a mission leader to come out at least one time and see our work here. So there's always an open invitation. But if it's a college student, we really try to be intentional in what the purpose is and them coming. Senegal, there are some countries you can go to where you can do a 4-week, 6-week mission trip and get a good experience and see what missions is like, and prepare your heart maybe for long-term. Most mission majors in school, or if you have a minor in missions at Bible college, you're required to do an internship on the field. And so even before you know where you want to go, sometimes a missionary will pick a certain, or a student will pick a country. Senegal has a lot of challenges. And so we really try to, I send out an application if somebody wants to do an not only internship, but just come for a few weeks. Then we send out an application and really try to get their heart and mind. What's your reason for coming? What are some of your goals with this? That way we're on the same page. We know what their expectations are, and they know kind of what the dynamic of the ministry is here, because we have seasons where it's real slow and then seasons where things are real fast. And so if they happen to catch us at a slow season, I don't want them to feel like they wasted their time, coming, just because it is a different language. And so they can't just go out and do whatever. Right. And so being where we're at, we do try, if we're going to have somebody here long-term who's doing an internship, we get them connected with our local university where there are English students. And we've done that several times. We hosted a college, Bible college, and they did every day. They went out to the university. They hosted a Bible club, had a tremendous opportunity to share the gospel. And so, you really just have to know what is the purpose of the trip. And so if you're going to go on one of these trips, try to articulate to the missionary some of your expectations and what is your heart and what's your desire. And then if you're the missionary, try to communicate kind of what to expect when they come, what it's going to be like. Have you hosted any individuals that have come for several weeks at a time?
So this is the part where we actually haven't mentioned the most important people on a missions trip. You know who those people are, Josh? Our
Who's
wives.
that? Your wives. Oh yeah.
So, we're doing the talking, and we actually, when the groups are still do a lot of the talking, and the wives really do a lion's share of the work.
Oh man, yeah.
Because as we'll talk later on about logistics, it is a lot of work to host a mission group. Now,
Yeah.
as far as having individuals in, let me just say, first of all, that praise the Lord that I had a missionary friend here who had me in for an internship. I spent 84 days here, almost 3 months on the mission field. And I am certain, first of all, that if I'd never gone on any missions trips, I wouldn't be a missionary. But I'm certain I would not be a missionary here in the Dominican Republic if I'd not had that time. That being said, we have not hosted someone to that length. Oh, week, 2 month, maybe. Generally, for us, we have actually hosted a lot of couples or single people who wanted to go on survey trips. So they've reached out and they said, "Hey, where would you want to? Where should we go if we consider the Dominican Republic?" And I love that. I'll take them and I'll kind of give them my week, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, and
Mhm.
I'll drive them all over the country, show them the needs. But just for our family dynamic, it's not always been the best to host like an intern. And so this is where it kind of comes from our perspectives, where it works best for your ministry, your family dynamic. But at the same time, we
Exactly.
love having missionary groups, having prospective missionaries. In fact, there's a gentleman who is an hour away from me, one of the youngest, not youngest, but he's young, one of the brightest missionaries on the island, who is just dynamic. He's Dominican, went back to America. Then the Lord called him here, and he and his teammate at the time, they came and they were thinking about one city. They say, "Hey, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, you should consider this one city. Let's go there tomorrow." And we went, and you know what? He's serving there today. I'm not saying I'm because of that, but I helped him along the way. And so I'm very thankful that Lord allows us to do things like that. But all of that through the filter of your family dynamic and which works for you.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. If you're a missionary, you need to take that into consideration if you're going to host individuals versus a group. Our experience, and I'm sure yours is the same because you just mentioned it, when you host a group, there is a lot of work that goes into it. The wives do so much, a part of that planning, planning out meals and planning out where everybody's going to sleep and how you're going to wash clothes. And I mean, there's so much that goes into that part of hosting a group. And I'll say one time we hosted a church, and one of the couples that came on this group for the construction team, he's a businessman. He's been all over the world. He sits on a couple boards for mission agencies. And I'm only saying this because I want to put a plug in for my wife and just the tremendous job she does. But as we were leaving, his wife said to us, she said, I've been all over the world and with different missionary wives and different missionaries hosting us. And she said, you're in one of the top 3 of wives who have been the most prepared. And she said, I'll be honest, I've never seen as prepared. Everything was laid out, meals, like everything. And she said, I just want to encourage you. And that was all on my wife. She's so good at that. She could be the CEO of a major corporation. I mean, she's that good at it. And guys, if you're going to host a team, you got to make sure your wife is on board with it. All right. Because there is a lot of work that goes into it. And one of the things that this gentleman's wife said to us is, she said, we got to one mission agency, or not agency, we got to one mission field, and the missionaries brought us into the home the first day. And the wife said, well, here's the money you guys sent ahead for meals and stuff. Here's how you get to the marketplace. Go ahead and buy what you need. And there's the kitchen. And she's like the whole week they had to buy the food themselves, prepare it themselves. And the wife didn't really do much. Now there's a case where the husband didn't really communicate with his wife about whether or not she wanted to host a group. So with groups, you definitely got to have your wife on board. This is a partnership, and there's a lot to it. A lot of planning goes into it, but there's a different dynamic, like you said, with hosting individuals. And my wife and I we've sat down with our kids and we've talked about it, and we've come to an agreement, and we enjoy hosting individuals. And we've made a decision, if an individual, young man or woman, is going to come and spend an extended time with us, they just become a part of the family. And we let the intern know, or young person know, when they come, not only are you part of a family, but being part of a family means you're going to be exposed to our flaws and all. Okay. You're going to see us. We're going to let you get insight into what our family dynamic is, the good and the bad. Okay. And so that's something that very few people are willing to do that. And if my wife was not willing to do that, I wouldn't be hosting teams or individuals as much as we do. Even my kids, if they weren't comfortable with it, then I would, step back and put a lot more distance between even where they stay and how involved they are. But we made a decision that, if you come, you're part of the family, and you're gonna get insight, because I want young people to go into missions. If they're going to go to the mission field, they need to be exposed to the reality of both the good and the bad of mission life. I think they need it. The sooner you can get exposed to culture shock, okay, the better prepared you can be. And so I'll give an example. A survey trip, you ask a bunch of different questions, right? Where would I live? Where is it secure? Where am I going to start a ministry? How do you get food here? What do you have access to? There's all those questions you ask on a survey trip. Okay. But culture shock comes when you experience the answers to those questions. You don't just get the answers to the questions. That's a survey trip. But then when you come back, when you experience those answers, that's when you go through culture shock. And a lot of times most missionaries face that their first term, and they're not prepared for it, because during their survey trip, they said to themselves, oh, this will be easy. Like, this is what's available. Then you get here and experience, and it's like, whoa, that's not what I was mentally prepared for. And so one of my goals in hosting individuals is to put them into real life experiences, not just seeing our family and the reality of living overseas, but, once they're here for a week or two, drop them off in the middle of the marketplace with a couple bucks. They have to go buy something and find their way back. And, just allow them to experience the reality of those questions, the answers to those questions, so that they can get a better handle on what am I expecting if I am to go into full-time missions trips. And so we try to pull back the layers of the romantic side of missions and expose it in the reality for what it is, the good and the bad. And like I said, that's not for everybody. That's not for every missionary. But if you're able to do that as a missionary, I highly recommend try to take that approach. I think it'll better prepare young people for full-time ministry on the mission field.
Yeah, it's funny because all these different types of missions trips we're talking about can be different as far as our dynamics go. For instance, when we're hosting a big missions trip, often we can take a look at the ages of the people who are there and maybe the career paths they have, and you can kind of spot, like, one of the churches that comes from Pennsylvania often will have retirees and teenagers. And so one of the things I've tried to do over the years is that when I see young men, potential candidates for being missionaries, I try to gravitate towards them, include them in my runs to the hardware store. And just because I remember what it was like for me. I mean, Josh and I, we didn't actually mention this. Both of us are missionaries. Josh, I believe, was called to missions while on a missions trip in Mexico, and as a result of my missions trip to India. And so I remember being in India on the platform as they were recognizing our group, and the missionary saying, maybe Eric Johnson one day will be a missionary here or around the world. I'd never even thought that thought. And so because of that, I intentionally tried to spend time with young guys who maybe are thinking about that. Maybe God's planting those seeds. And so sometimes it is a man who's in Bible college who's already thinking that way. But even on a missions trip where, 95% of these guys are going to return to their works, they're never going to think about being a missionary. They may give more to missions or pray their kid becomes a missionary. Be intentional with how you spend time. I think you might have even zeroed in on that on your talk with Daniel Jenkins. And I just think that's something that we can do even on a missions trip where it's about, painting some rooms.
Yeah, exactly. Go back and listen to that interview. As one of the first interviews we did. And Daniel shares his testimony. Both he and his wife, Sarah, came on
Mhm.
separate mission trips here to
That's
Senegal.
right.
Sarah came for 3 months. Daniel came on a claim trip with BIMI to do some construction. And
Mhm.
both of them, God touched their hearts while they were here. And hey, they're on the mission field. They're serving in Gambia. We're going this summer to do a biblical faith
Unbelievable.
seminar and do some evangelistic outreach. And that's, to me, it's worth it. It's getting that exposure to the need, and God will touch the heart when young men and women and see face to face, the reality of the needs there. And like I mentioned earlier, those who have come, we have a connection now with pastors who've been here. They see the need, and we're very intentional, and we do a lot of debriefing at the end of the day. If the church now, like
Mm.
Temple Baptist, they do their own debriefing. They do a great job at, they're so experienced with it. But if it's maybe your church's first mission trip, we try to have everything scheduled out, and we always have a debriefing at the end of the day. And then our final day we're here, we have kind of an hour or two where we do a lot of testimony and sharing, and we share some more about the needs. And so that connection that develops the next time we're at, in the States at their church, there's just a deeper connection there and a greater partnership because they've seen it face to face, and people are much more apt to invest more, not just prayer and finances, but their time, and money in the work that they've got to see face to face, in person. And so, well, let's go ahead and start wrapping up our discussion. Do you have any other points you wanted to add? I have a list of a couple things that I wrote down as tips for a successful mission trip. But before we get to that, is there anything you wanted to add, that notes that you had
There,
written down?
yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll touch on some of these things, and they'll, we can't get into everything, but real quickly, I did write down a few things. One, and this is something that I think a lot of times, in my experience, seeing other missionaries who have struggled with having groups, we haven't struggled as much, and I think it's because well, first of all, we had a great example in our home church, and then two,
Mhm.
we had other missionaries help us along the way. But a lot of missionaries don't emphasize ahead of time with the groups. This is what we're going to be doing. This is how much
Right.
it's going to cost. We're going to need this ahead of time. And I've seen a lot of missionaries, I mean, they've been holding the bag, and they think because a church gives them $50 or $100 a month, they shouldn't ask for it. Well, if that's your reasoning, you're going to be paying for years trying to
Oh,
recoup your
yeah.
expenses according to that. So it seems simple, but be very upfront and no fixed costs, and get them to know this ahead of time. And say, we're going to need that ahead of time. Now, most trips, most groups, if you work with them and they've gone on mission trips, they understand this. But a lot of times, especially with youth pastors, it's their first time, and you've got to
Right.
be real strong in your convictions to say this is what we're going to do. And then something else I'm going to add in here, this is kind of the fun part. Well, let me add this real quick. Have plan B's. As you mentioned with COVID, I mean, you had 40 people sitting there. I mean, you got to
Yeah.
have some plan B's. And I'm sure
Yep.
just because of COVID, you couldn't even do your plan B's, but have plan B's. We had a teen group from our home church, actually, and we had a whole team week plan, and it rained the first 3 days. And so we had to play
Mm,
inside. And so we had to figure that out, and we have that plan. And
yeah.
then lastly, just these are miscellaneous things. Um, have fun days. Have a fun day planned in there where they can experience your culture in a fun way, whether it be
Definitely.
restaurants or
Yep.
museums or monuments, something that they'll take back as we didn't just work and see these poor people, that they experience the joyful part of being a missionary. And that really connects you with that day with a lot less stress, hopefully. And so then just a little bit of tidbits when it comes to hosting a missions trip.
Definitely 100% agree with that. Make sure you take that time out to go and do some special activities. Julie and I, if it's a large group and they're only here for a short amount of time, I think we did it with Temple Baptist, your home church, maybe one other church, but we would give two options. We would put together a package of touristy items, okay, like a Senegal hat,
Mm-hmm.
little artifacts that they would normally buy in the village, and all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So we would put together a basket, and we would say, all right, we'd send a picture of it ahead of time and say, hey, these baskets cost $50 a basket. If you may not get time to go out to do the tourist shopping because it's such a short trip. If you want to pre-buy one of these baskets, just bring the money. You can buy it from us. It's already made for you. Or we would give the option, if it is a short time that they're here, then we would segment off times during the week where I would take like three people at a time. Let's say there's 15 people on the trip. I would take 3 people at a time for 2 hours in a day and go out and see this town, where we're at. Now, there's not a lot of sightseeing where we're at. There's not a lot to do,
Right.
but there's a few things you can
Don't
go
live in
and
the
do.
Caribbean.
Yeah. So like where you're at, you want to take a whole day with the whole group and go do something. Whereas where we're at, I mean, we all go to the beach. We'll do that as a group. We'll go down to the beach, see the Atlantic Ocean and all that. But other than that, there's not a ton that you could do here. We'll take everybody out to eat one of the nights. We have one of the best steak restaurants here. $14 a plate for one of the best steak dinner you'll ever have. And so we'll make sure everybody goes and gets that. But yeah, so we'll kind of structure it where, hey, if you don't have time to go out, you can either pre-buy one of our packages of tourist items, or we'll take you out, 3 to 4 at a time and go and see the town and then come back. That way the work is constantly going. So that's what's worked for us with the dynamic where we're at. But yeah, definitely want to make sure, have everything planned out, from morning till night, and everything will go smoothly, you would hope. And so here's a few, as we wrap it up, here's a few tips I wrote for having a successful mission trip. And this is for someone who's going on a mission trip. All right. I've went on a few mission trips myself, and I still plan on going on mission trips in the future. I told my oldest son, we're going to come visit the Johnson family in the Dominican Republic. And on our next trip, we're going to come back and do that. So we're excited about doing that. But anyways, that being said,
can't wait.
Here's a few tips. Number 1, I wrote down, and you already mentioned this, go with the priority to encourage the missionary. That I think that should be your number 1 goal on a mission trip, is to be an encouragement to the missionary. Understanding that most likely you're going to visit a country where it's a different culture and a different language. And even if it's the same language, it's definitely a different culture, different way of thinking. And so the missionary is there. He's already learning to adapt to the culture, but the missionary has not given up their culture wholly, right? So we're living outside of our culture. We're living outside of what we grew up with. And so it is refreshing to gather with people when somebody from your own culture and your own language comes to visit you on the mission field. It's refreshing, most of the time for the missionary. And so if you plan a mission trip, plan with that in mind, that, hey, I want to go and do whatever I can to be a blessing to the missionary. And if nothing else happens on this mission trip, if I've been a blessing to him, his wife, or his kids in some way, then it's been a successful mission trip. Have you been encouraged or discouraged more or less with mission trips you've hosted?
Oh, no, I can hardly ever think of any negative things that have happened with the groups themselves. I think most people have got to that point. I mean, once in a while you have a person who we might think of a little selfish in the group, but generally the groups that have come and they've just been overwhelming, whether it be bringing things from the States that we can't get here in the Dominican, or just the time they just encourage you and tell you how much they appreciate you being a missionary and being a representative of Christ for them and their church. We really do look forward to those trips. And I appreciate the people who are willing to come and sacrifice their time and effort, and thankful for the testimonies they share. And so, yeah, we've really, really been blessed to have people come. In fact, I believe that couple you were mentioning earlier have been some of our greatest mission groups we've hosted and encouraged us as well. And so I'm very thankful for everyone who's come alongside and helped us in the ministry on missions trips.
All right. So the second thing I wrote down was, you may connect with a national or a local from the area where you're at, but that may not be the case. Sometimes we go with the expectation that, hey, I'm going to connect with somebody in the, local there, and I'm going to be able to really develop a relationship. And that's great if you do, but don't go necessarily thinking that's going to happen. You got to remember, sometimes it takes missionaries years to develop relationships, and to come in and develop a relationship that's going to be a real relationship. Yes, you will be able to hopefully share the gospel. But again, there's a lot of nuance to when you just come in, especially if you're American, a person of status. In a lot of countries, you're automatically considered wealthy as an American. And so you have this status where nobody's going to say no to you. And so you have to be very careful in the relationships that you develop. And you may not connect that deeply with a national. And so that's why I said, make it a priority to encourage the missionary. Because if you can encourage the missionary, maybe he's ready to quit, and leave the field, and you've encouraged him during your time, and now he's going to be there longer. And sure, maybe you can connect with the national. You run into somebody who speaks English, and you develop a great relationship that lasts in the long term. But that's not always the case, depending on where you go. And so your mission is to encourage the missionary and to encourage the local church that's there. And if you're able to connect with the national and get into a deeper relationship so you can share the gospel, that's wonderful. But I wouldn't set that as one of your main expectations, because that doesn't always happen on mission trips like that. Have you had any experience? Maybe somebody's come and has connected with somebody and that turned into a great relationship, or is it generally not the case?
Well, you mentioned it earlier in the podcast that sometimes the difficulty of that is just language. But when that barrier can be broken or at least somewhat connected, I have learned over the years, what I have tried to be is intentional by having our nationals, especially national leadership in the church, when there's like a work group, come alongside if they can and either help in some cases because they do those type of tasks, or I remember specifically when we had a group that was working very hard in our construction, that we had ladies in the church who came and they brought refreshments in the morning and snacks, and allow them to make connections with the Americans in this case and see, wow, here are people giving of their time and effort for our building, our church, and we want to make a connection with them. And so I tried. Our pastor Ari, before he was a pastor, he's a painter by trade, and he and one of the gentlemen from the church, they were painters, and even though they didn't speak the same language, they made a connection that's always been there. And so we try to put those people together. Sometimes it works, and there's long lasting relationships and they connect on Facebook and things like that, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think most of all, what I tried to do is encourage our church people here in the Dominicans to understand what the sacrifice these people have made and how much they love the cause of Christ and love your church and your missionary. And you should be, if anything, just grateful and try to reach out and make a connection. And sometimes it works, generally it doesn't, but sometimes you do make those relationships stick.
Yeah, definitely. And if it does, pray before you go. Prayer is a big part of having a successful mission trip. Put a lot of prayer into it, and God will open that door, for you to connect with somebody if it happens. I would say another important point is don't give away anything unless you first clear it with the missionary. All right.
Yes.
Americans and Westerners in general are very generous, extremely generous. And what should be, it's the Christian thing to do, right? It's natural for a Christian to feel empathy toward the poor and to feel empathy toward those who are in different, and to be generous. That's natural. It's a very Christian thing to want to do. But sometimes there are certain contexts where giving can actually set back the work that the missionary is attempting to accomplish. And so, and also it's just, you don't know who is legitimately in need and not. Right now, most of the time when somebody came to us and said, hey, can I give this out to this person? We're like, oh yeah, of course. They'll be very grateful for that. Because we do at the beginning of every mission trip, we let everybody know, don't Don't give anything else, give anything out, and we'll give some criteria, if it's this situation, this or that. Like, for example, you'll see kids on the street here and you're like, oh, I just want to give them $1. Well, that dollar you just gave them is going to go directly to their Islamic teacher. They don't get to see it, right? They're not supposed to use it. And if they don't bring back a certain amount of money, then they're punished for it. So we give out candy, we give out bread, we give out food, so we always have something on hand that we can hand them. And even if you give them clothing, if you give them a pair of shoes, unless you've coordinated it with the mosque that they're connected to, a lot of times you would just give it to a random kid on the street. Their Islamic teacher will take it from them and he'll either go and resell it or he'll put the dirty clothes back on, because who wants to give money to somebody who has nice clothes on? And so those are things, you got to think through. Another example is we just hosted somebody recently late last year. And as soon as he got off the plane, you're inundated with everything, the sights, the smells, the sounds, and you don't know what's coming at you and you don't know who is coming at you. And so we were putting his luggage into the car at the airport, and these two guys kind of came up and they were following us. And he assumed I was kind of keeping them blocked from approaching too closely to him. But I think he assumed they were with the airport. And I went around the other side of the car. I go around the side of the car. We had put his luggage in. And when I came back around the other side of the car, he had his wallet out and he was handing out $20 bills. And I said, no. So I grabbed the money. I said, these guys don't work for the airport. They're just random guys who came up here and pretend to work here. Don't give them any money. And so on the way home, we talked about that. Like, we don't just give anything out for any random reason and things like that. And so, yeah, those are things that are important. Most of the time the missionary will be like, yeah, of course, if you want to give this out, let's do it. It's better to coordinate though, and maybe pre-plan a day where we do charity events, we give things out. So that's important. And then I would just say last three things: go with an open heart. Okay. Just tell the Lord, would you want me to come serve here in this country? Touch my heart. If this is something you would want me to do, be open on the mission trips to maybe God would possibly call you. Ask the missionary how you can partner with them in the long term. So sit down with the missionary before you leave and say, hey, how can we better encourage you? What are some ways we can stay in touch? What can we do to be a greater encouragement to you? And most missionaries will give you, some ideas of how to stay in touch and how to be an encouragement, things like that. Make sure you capitalize on that mission trip you took, and stay connected with the missionary and the people that you were serving during that trip. And then lastly, I would just say, expect the unexpected. Okay. Expect it. The culture is going to be different. The environment, the poverty, those are things that, you're expecting. The unexpected, missionaries can be quirky. And so be ready to, kind of deal with your missionary host having some quirks, and just, it's okay. All right. It takes all types to do the work of God. And I've heard so many stories of just some quirky things that either missionaries have done, or maybe a pastor did on a mission trip, or just things like that. But just remember, this is the work of the Lord. You're coming to glorify Jesus, and people are different, and it takes all kinds to do the work of the Lord. And God calls all different personalities. And so, don't go and be shocked if the missionary is a little weird, and you see him in his element. For all you know, that's how he's adapted to the culture, and the people there love him, even though you might be, turning your head sideways saying, what is he doing? And so, anyways, those are just kind of some things I wanted to put out there. Is there anything else that you wanted to give as we wrap up?
It's a tough thing to say as a missionary, but it's 100% true. All missionaries are a little weird. You have to be a little weird to be a missionary. And so absolutely be ready for a weird missionary. But no, missions trips are wonderful. On the missionary side, preparation is the key. Being in communication with your group, them understanding what to expect and what you're expecting. being prepared with materials and whatever, logistical needs there. But once they get there, do your best to make it a fun time. You're basically just wetting their whistle. Everybody understands if they're staying for 7 days, they're not getting a true understanding of what mission life is. But there are insights you can give them. There are things they're just going to observe. And it's encouraging to be around others who are praying for you, sacrificing for you, willing to come give blood, sweat, and tears, hopefully not too much blood, to the work there. And they really are encouraging times. But I'll say this, they need to be balanced. I know one dear family of ours who would tell you, we saw them before we became missionaries here. They had too many groups. They just said yes to everybody. And so you just have to make sure that you balance that with your ministry and have them when it works for your ministry, and learn to say, that's not going to work this year. How about next year? And if you can do that, I think it's just going to be a tremendous blessing to your ministry.
Well, that's great. I would love to do a podcast in the future where we just write down stories of either missionaries who've had funny stories or pastors who've gone on mission trips and have interesting stories. We need to compile something like that.
I know who we're going to have on. Brandon Lawrence, the assistant pastor at Temple Baptist. Nobody in the world has more interesting stories on mission trips than Brandon. So we'll have him on.
Yeah, we need to get him on and have him share some of that. It's excellent. Well, we hope this has been a blessing to you. And if you're a missionary, giving you some ideas, I hope you'll consider hosting mission trips, hosting individuals. Get exposure to your field and let people know what the need is. Let them see firsthand how they can better pray for you and engage with your ministry. And so try to encourage your pastors, your supporting churches to come and see the field firsthand. And so they can see, the blessings and challenges of being a missionary. And if you've never done a mission trip, consider it. What skill do you have? And then find a mission trip that you can plug in whatever skill you have. And even if you don't have any skills, there's always something that you can do on the mission field, whether it's, just encouraging the missionary kids that are there. There's always something you can do to plug in somewhere. And so, hey, we want to give you an open invitation. Come out to Senegal anytime and visit us. We would love to have you. And if it's your first time going across the ocean, we always tell people from Washington, D.C. or from New York City, it's a direct flight and it's only a 7-hour flight. So I know Dominican, it's a lot cheap. It's not as expensive. It's a quicker flight. Everybody goes to the Caribbean. I mean, come on, you can visit Erik anytime, but hey, if you want a real experience of, I don't want to say real missions, but I want to talk, we're talking about missions. Okay. That you can come over to Africa and come and see
Club
us.
Med.
That's right. No. It's I met a missionary from the Bahamas. He actually grew up there. And that's one of the things he pointed out in his missionary video was, these are the resorts, but when you turn around and go past the hills, it's poverty stricken and it's not the dream vacation you think it is. There are real needs here. True. And so I kid about that, but I definitely am going to take a mission trip to Dominican Republic one day. And who knows, maybe Erik, you'll come visit us. We'd love to have you and one of your kids come and we'll see what happens. So, all right. Well, this is Josh Mead from Senegal, West Africa. Thanks for listening. God bless. Erik, go ahead and close it up.
All right. Thank you for listening. Please share this podcast with people you care about and have to do with missions. And we thank you for listening.